And good evening, I'm Morgan Chesky in for Tom Llamas. We begin top story tonight with dual storm threats on both coasts at this hour. The waterlogged West bracing for yet another round of torrential rain as the nor'easter barrels towards New England. Take a look at this drone footage in just tonight. This is a scene in Pajaro in Northern California. Rivers turned into roads, entire neighborhoods underwater after a 300-foot levee breach. In Central California, crews pulling off daring water rescues. The California Highway Patrol airlifting this man to safety after his car was washed away by floodwaters near King City. Hundreds of rescues reported over the last several days, and likely many more coming tomorrow, when yet another atmospheric river dumps several more inches of rain. We're keeping an eye on that storm, plus this monster nor'easter swirling over the mid-Atlantic. Parts of New England bracing for up to 1.5 feet of snow. Bill Caron's here to time it all out in just a moment. But we begin first out west in Pajaro, California, and Miguel Almaguer leads us off.
Tonight, wading through a sea of mud and muck, the flooded community of Pajaro is cleaning up from the last storm just as the next one barrels in. A 300-foot levee breach near Santa Cruz has left houses underwater, power out, and washed away roads.
So even when the waters recede, we don't know how much damage it's done to our railroads, to our roads.
After more than 200 rescues, this is what authorities fear tomorrow. A second atmospheric river closing in, days after this damage from the first one.
The sound of the river is just so loud that it's just frightening.
The same central and northern California cities inundated with 1 foot of rain and in the middle of severe flooding today face another 8 inches Tuesday.
We've got a lot of shoveling to do.
We are too old for this. We just cleaned it up from the last flood.
As another foot of snow blankets the Sierra, bi-coastal storms have 24 million under winter weather alerts. With up to 18 inches of snow forecasted in parts of New England, a March nor'easter is bringing a mix of rain, sleet, and snow to the northeast. Salt trucks ready in Boston, 8,000 utility workers on standby in New York.
This could be deadly.
For millions, a winter of misery, and now the threat of another dangerous blow.
And Miguel Almaguer joins us now from Pajaro, California. Miguel, you're in one of the hardest hit areas there. You mentioned the power outages in California. How many are still in the dark tonight?
Yeah, Morgan, in this area where their floodwaters have not yet receded, and they probably won't recede for several hours, if not days, when that next storm comes in, there are hundreds of people here who don't have power. But across California, that number is easily in the thousands. Utility crews are doing all they can to get people back online. That next storm is expected to hit overnight, Morgan.
And Miguel, ahead of those storms on the East Coast tomorrow, what are authorities telling residents to do now in order to try and stay safe?
Well, they're asking folks on the East Coast to stock up on supplies, food, medicine that they may need. That nor'easter, again, is bringing that mix of snow, sleet, and rain. But in many parts of the Northeast, they're expecting several inches of snow. The roads could be treacherous. As you know, they haven't had really serious winter weather conditions out there. This could be a major test tomorrow.
No doubt. Miguel Almaguer right in the middle of the storm zone. Miguel, thank you. And for more on these devastating conditions, NBC News meteorologist Bill Caron joins us now. Bill, I'm curious, what areas are you most concerned about over the next 24 hours here?
In the Northeast, I'm concerned with power outages and falling trees on houses and cars. And then in Southern California, I'm very concerned with how much rain we're going to get in a short period of time on the ground that's already soggy and soaked. I mean, I think the pictures out of Southern California will be a lot worse than what we get out of the Northeast. But let's start in the Northeast, and then we'll go to the West. The nor'easter is forming and brewing. Heavy rain is moving into southern New England, snow in the Catskills. And then this is all going to combine tomorrow for our nor'easter. And when you wake up tomorrow morning, if you're watching live TV and you see reporters in the Boston area, it'll look like a tropical storm or a low-end hurricane, 50 to 65-mile-per-hour wind gusts and driving rain or wet snowflakes. So that's what coastal areas will deal with. But we have winter storm warnings. This is easily the biggest snowstorm of the winter season for areas of New York and all of New England. The cities themselves, though, aren't going to get as much as the higher elevations. Albany probably be one of the cities that gets the most with a good chance of 10 to 16. But Hartford to Boston, 2 to 4. New York City, nothing, probably just seeing some flakes melt on the pavement. Scranton Scranton 6 to 10, Syracuse 8 to 12, and Maine will get it also here. But I'm very concerned with that 1 to 2 feet of snow and all the high elevations of New England, includes all the mountainous areas, and that's where we're going to see the worst power outages. That's where people are already stocking up and filling their gas cans and worried about the power. And then that storm in the west, here comes the atmospheric river, Morgan, and we are going to watch. These rainfall totals are going to be scary in Southern California. Right now, we're thinking 3 inches in Los Angeles, of all places.
Yeah, scary measures there, Bill. Thank you so much. Next tonight, President Biden's administration seeking to reassure Americans that their money is secure after 2 of the largest bank failures in U.S. history. The government reassurance appearing to go a long way towards easing nerves on Wall Street. However, concerns remain high over whether things will get even worse. NBC's Jake Ward with the latest on those bank jitters tonight.
With 2 U.S. banks being forced into closure in recent days, President Biden sought to assure the country before markets opened this morning.
Americans can have confidence that the banking system is safe. Your deposits will be there when you need them.
His administration announcing Sunday night that customers at Silicon Valley Bank, which collapsed on Friday, and Signature Bank in New York, which was shut down on Sunday, would be made whole by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or FDIC.
No losses will be, and this is an important point, no losses will be borne by the taxpayers. Let me repeat that. No losses will be borne by the taxpayers.
The Biden administration saying its move is not a bailout of the banks like we saw in the 2008 financial crisis, but rather a decision to protect bank customers.
The money to pay the uninsured depositors, such as it's needed, will come from a deposit insurance fund that's paid for by the banks.
The news is welcome relief for Ben Kaufman, founder and CEO of kids store Camp. Most of his company's money was in SVB when the bank went under.
We were panicked. I mean, we didn't know, how we were going to make ends meet in the coming weeks.
Desperate to raise cash, his company slashed prices by 40%.
We sent out an email with a discount code. The code was bankrun.
Markets closed mixed today as concern over what comes next for the smaller banks took a toll. The overall stock value for regional banks declined by more than 12%. Experts say the White House had no choice but to act by declaring a so-called systemic risk exception for SVB and Signature so that the full amount of deposits would be covered by the government.
The government was trying to stop a precipitous withdrawal, essentially a bank run, where uninsured depositors removed their deposits from banks. So it looks for sure like the worst possible outcome has been avoided. The question is whether or not confidence has been reinstilled into the banking system.
Ben Kaufman, who regained access to his funds today, says he typically only has to worry about running his company.
We now also have to think about where our cash sits and what bank we're at. And that's a whole nother added layer of complexity in the already complex world we all live in.
And Jake Ward joins us now from Menlo Park, California, not far from Silicon Valley. So, Jake, in the aftermath of SVB's collapse, it appears we're also seeing heightened scrutiny of actions taken within that very bank now.
That's right, Morgan. At this hour, we've been watching people come and go from this branch of Silicon Valley Bank, trying to get their money out and working directly with FDIC personnel on site. Now we're seeing that there is a class action lawsuit filed against 2 executives from SVB and the parent company of Silicon Valley Bank. That lawsuit alleges that they did not pay enough attention to rising interest rates and the risk that they pose to the bank. We've reached out to Silicon Valley Bank for comment, but have not heard back. Morgan?
Jake Ward tracking it all. Jake, thank you. For more on the fallout after 2 banks have now crashed and what it could mean for your money, I want to bring in Betsy Stevenson, former member of the Council of Economic Advisors during the Obama administration and a professor of public policy and economics at the University of Michigan. Betsy, thank you so much for joining Top Story tonight. So we have the Fed backstopping bank deposits to avert a crisis, but then you have regional banks whose stocks tanked today. In fact, you can see these banks here all down, First Republic taking the biggest hit, while the overall stock market mostly flat today. So, big question. Do you think this plan worked?
Oh, I think the plan absolutely worked. It's really important that we distinguish between depositors. Those are people who have their money in the bank, and shareholders. Those are people who are investing in a bank, hoping that the bank is really profitable, makes a lot of money, and therefore they make a lot of money. What this plan did was said, we're protecting depositors. Your money's safe in the bank. I'm sure that if you're running a small business like that toy store, you had one heck of a stressful weekend. But the reality is you don't have to think about whether your bank's the right bank to put your money in. We have FDIC insurance. You know, I think it would be a good idea to get rid of that cap and we should just insure deposits. There's, a lot of people who feel that way. What we saw this weekend was government stepped in and said, we're not going to worry about the cap. If you had your money in this bank, we're going to protect you. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to protect the shareholders. You know, you were hoping to make money. They were making a lot of risky bets. If those risky bets had paid off, those shareholders would have made a lot of money. Those risky bets didn't pay off. Those shareholders aren't going to make money. In fact, they're going to lose money. I think what you saw stocks falling on some of these regional banks is realizing that, maybe they're not as profitable as the shareholders thought. That's, I think, a real big, question there is, are these banks going to make the kind of money I thought they were going to make? Maybe it's time to sell my shares in this bank. I think the other thing is, what we learned is the 2018 banking deregulation failed. And what it did was it allowed smaller banks to be riskier. That risk can come with upside profit potential, but it also comes with downside potential. And we knew that when we passed it. And so I think people are thinking, they're probably going to be re-regulated and they're not going to be able to make as many risky decisions, which means that the upside potential profitability might not be there. So I think that's why you're seeing those movements in the stock market. That's not about people having to worry about their money in the bank, though.
Right. Betsy, I do want to ask you, President Biden and the Treasury Department have said this backstop will be funded by Wall Street and large financial institutions, not taxpayers. So do you think this will eventually, though, impact everyday people? Is this just another bailout?
I don't think it's a bailout. Look, if you have your money in the bank, I bet you didn't investigate how solvent that bank is. You just put your money in the bank. And that's what we all want you to do. That's what the government wants you to do. I think that's the way for the economy to work smoothest. I just pick a bank that's convenient, that offers the services that I want. I'm not asking questions like, is that bank going to be able to give me my money when it's, time to pay a bill? So I think it's important that we guarantee depositors their money back. A bailout is when we help out the shareholders and the CEO, and we're not doing that. What is likely going to happen is when we actually liquidate like Silicon Valley Bank, there's still a lot of assets there that are worth a lot of money. So they're going to be able to recover a lot of the money to pay those depositors. So I think that's one reason why it's not coming from taxpayers. And they've said if at the end of the day, the assets aren't enough to make all the depositors whole, then they'll do this through a levy on the banking system, through a tax on the banking system that tries to get the money back from the risky behavior that banks have done. Therefore, it's not going to come out of sort of general funds from a typical taxpayer.
Some financial food for thought. Betsy Stevenson, thank you so much. And now to the latest on the criminal investigation into President Trump. His lawyer telling NBC News he will not testify in the grand jury in the Stormy Daniels hush payment probe. The president in Iowa tonight on a campaign stop as he is unleashing attacks against those investigating him and his political rivals. Our Ken Delanian has more.
Tonight, with a criminal indictment potentially looming and a campaign battle beginning, Donald Trump drawing from his well-known playbook, sounding off with a barrage of social media rants.
Can't let it happen. It's illegal as can be. We're going to stop it.
On the bank failures, he gave a doomsday warning, posting, "We will have a Great Depression far bigger and more powerful than that of 1929, as proof the banks are already starting to collapse." He lashed out at the campaign finance investigation regarding alleged hush money payments to Stormy Daniels, describing it as an extortion plot. His lawyer, Joe Tacopina, telling NBC News his client is not going to testify, then laying out their strategy in an interview with ABC News.
He had to pay money because there was going to be an allegation that was going to be publicly embarrassing to him, regardless of the campaign.
His former attorney, Michael Cohen, who has turned on his one-time client, testifying to the grand jury today.
Well, I'm just here to answer the questions. This is all about accountability. He needs to be held accountable for his dirty deeds.
While Trump is the only candidate to declare for 2024, his potential rivals are sharpening their attacks. His vice president, Mike Pence, speaking in his strongest words yet about Trump's role in the January 6th riot, Democrats in a closed dinner for elected officials and journalists on Saturday, saying, "I had no right to overturn the election, and his reckless words endangered my family and everyone at the Capitol that day. And I know history will hold Donald Trump accountable." In the past, Trump has attacked Pence, questioning his loyalty.
Mike Pence had a chance to be great. He had a chance to be, frankly, historic. But just like Bill Barr and the rest of these weak people, Mike did not have the courage to act.
Tonight, Trump visiting the key state of Iowa, just 3 days after Florida Governor Ron DeSantis was there, leveling this apparent attack on the former president without saying his name.
There's no drama in our administration. There's no palace intrigue. They basically just sit back and say, okay, what's the governor going to do next? And we roll out and we execute and we do things and we get things done.
Ahead of his speech, Trump posting a more pointed attack at DeSantis, saying, "No other president was as pro-farmer as me. Tell that to Ron DeSanctimonious when he shows up to your door, hat in hand. Tell him to go home."
And Ken Delanian joins us now from New York. Ken, given that Trump just turned down the offer to testify and Michael Cohen testified today, does that tell us anything about just how soon an indictment might be coming here?
Hey, Morgan. Well, Michael Cohen's lawyer said that he's expected back before the grand jury tomorrow. And we think that the prosecutor would like to probably sum up the case to the grand jury before any indictment is issued. But that said, the grand jury meets on Thursdays. So conceivably, something could happen as soon as Thursday, or we may have to wait. We'll just have to wait and see, Morgan.
And you'll be watching all of it. Ken, thank you so much. For more on President Trump's legal and political strategies, I want to bring in our all-star panel tonight. NBC News legal analyst and former U.S. Attorney Barbara McQuaid and Republican strategist and NBC News political analyst Susan Del Percio. Thank you both for joining us. Barbara, we heard from Trump's lawyer in that piece that his client, former President Trump, had to pay the hush money because he was going to be politically embarrassed. But he also claimed it had nothing to do with influencing the 2016 presidential election. Do you think that's actually an effective defense here?
No, not at all. Those might explain motive. Those things may very well be true. It may also be that he was trying to save his wife Melania from embarrassment or exposing his own conduct to her. None of that matters because the fact is he falsified a business record and that it had the effect of being a contribution to his campaign. You can have mixed motives. What matters is whether you have the intent to commit the crime. For example, in public corruption cases, it's often the case that someone accepts a bribe to vote in favor for a particular contract on a city council. They later say, I was going to vote for it anyway because I thought it was the best one. It doesn't matter. If they accepted the bribe and they did it to advance that scheme, that still counts as bribery. So I don't think it is going to negate anything that he did here.
Susan, question for you. We know the former president is in Iowa tonight. Do you think that these possible pending criminal charges will have any impact whatsoever on his base?
Well, it's not right now. But if there is, in fact, an indictment, which looks likely, according to brilliant people like Barbara, it will have an impact. If an indictment's not good for a campaign, will it cost him his base? Probably not. But the only thing he can build off of, and I don't know the answer to this question, is did the Manhattan DA's office speak to the Department of Justice and to Georgia's district attorney to make sure that all of these potential indictments don't happen within 2 or 3 weeks of each other? Because if they do, that will actually kind of look like what Donald Trump calls a witch hunt, even though they would be completely valid.
And Barbara, back to you. We've learned Michael Cohen testified for 3 hours, and he's coming back. We know he's been vocal about Trump needing to be held accountable. So how much damage can he do to his former client? And do you think a grand jury will even find him credible?
Well, he obviously is a key to all of this. He is the one who was accepting these legal fees. He's the one who paid off the money in advance. He is the one who can explain why the records are false, because they were framed as legal fees when, in fact, they were hush money. So he is a key witness to all of this. But it seems like the prosecutors wanted to pepper him with questions. They've had him in for questioning something like 19 or 20 times. which makes sense when you're dealing with a convicted perjurer, after all. First, prosecutors have to ensure that they themselves believe what the person is saying. It is unethical to sponsor perjury or to put on a witness when you don't believe his testimony to be true. So the first thing they had to do is satisfy themselves that he was telling them the truth by testing everything he had to say against other witnesses and against other documents. The next thing they have to do is make sure that a grand jury and a jury ultimately can also believe him. And that typically requires corroboration. Don't just take Michael Cohen's word for it. Certainly he can explain how this all worked, but you need other witnesses and other documents to confirm what he is saying. So bank records, phone records, canceled checks, and other witnesses here, like the folks from the National Enquirer, could help bolster this story. And so I think, yes, I have put on all kinds of people who've been convicted of serious crimes before. You can get juries to believe them, but if and only if they can be corroborated with other objective evidence.
Yeah, any evidence goes a long way here. Susan, we know the former president has been all over social media, somewhat unsurprisingly, with a barrage of videos and attacks about criminal allegations and his political enemies. This was a big part of his strategy since 2016 when he won, then again in 2020 when he lost. So do you think he'll feel any need to change the strategy here?
Absolutely not. This is what Donald Trump knows. This is what he does. He will have a better campaign probably operationally. That's the stuff that people like us don't see. But he will be just as bombastic as he ever was, and actually probably more dangerous. And that does concern me quite a bit, is how he can, as we know, rile up a crowd, and potential threats he can make against others does concern me quite a bit.
Concern there. Barbara, this investigation into hush money paid to Stormy Daniels started years ago. So based on your experience, it's one thing to get an indictment, entirely another to get a conviction. What are your thoughts?
Yes, and the passage of time typically does not help in a case because, as witnesses are testifying about things that happened in 2016, by the time this case goes to trial, that'll be 7 or even 8 years down the road. And so I think sometimes witnesses can be skeptical of a human being's ability to remember things that happened that long ago. But a documents case is easier to prove after the passage of time because the documents themselves don't forget. And they don't, they don't have memories that fade the way humans do. So if this case relied on an eyewitness identification, for example, that might be problematic. But instead, it relies on documents. And I think that a jury can believe that people can remember what was going on with documents, even after the passage of 7 or 8 years.
Critical insight. Barbara McQuaid and Susan Del Percio, thank you both. Now to the growing clashes at the southern border, chaos erupting after hundreds of migrants from Mexico forced their way onto an international bridge connecting to El Paso. The port of entry shut down for hours as border officials attempted to regain control. Juan Venegas with that story tonight.
A border shutdown in El Paso, Texas, as hundreds forced their way onto the Paso del Norte International Bridge. Men, women, and children pushing Mexican soldiers out of the way in an attempt to enter the U.S. It seems they were misinformed, said this Mexican official, telling our Telemundo affiliate they were told they would be allowed into the U.S. once at the port of entry.
Don't know who did that or why they did that.
Democratic Congressman Henry Cuellar saying the bridges were built for trade and tourism, and immigration is now stressing the system.
My district, South Texas, people don't want to see this. They want to see an orderly process.
Customs and Border Protection responding with barricades and additional officers to stop the migrants. The crowd, including migrants from Venezuela seeking asylum, like this man telling our affiliate he's been waiting too long at the border and couldn't delay anymore. This woman adding the phone app used by U.S. authorities to process asylum requests has not worked for her.
This type of situation does not help their cause. We need to make sure that people that want to come over We have law and order at the border.
U.S. border officials say 2 other international bridges in the area were affected by other groups of migrants coming from Ciudad Juarez.
I just saw everyone recording. Understand what they're going through, but I think that they need to do it the right way.
This is not the first time a large group arrives this way at the port of entry. In 2018, members of a migrant caravan attempted to force their way through the San Isidro port of entry in San Diego. The border there shut down temporarily as the migrants were stopped, the incident forcing officials to tighten security. But the border in that region still strained. Just this weekend, 8 people died after 2 suspected smuggling boats crashed north of the city, according to the Coast Guard and CBP. Back in Texas, the border bridge has reopened, but thousands still waiting in Mexico as the migrant crisis continues.
And Guad Venegas joins us live in studio. Guad, I know you had a chance to speak to the congressman. What more did he tell you about how Mexico and the U.S. can cooperate in light of this recent incident?
Well, Morgan, Congressman Cuellar told me that federal officers on the American side are speaking to Mexican federal officers all the time, trying to coordinate as best as possible. Now, we saw in the images that a lot of these Mexican soldiers were overpowered by the crowds. So Cuellar did tell me that there could be more resources going to the border on the Mexican side to help with this issue. We know that hundreds of migrants are arriving on a daily basis at different cities along the Mexican border, and there just isn't enough resources when it comes to those Mexican federal officers to support the American CBP officers, Morgan.
All right, Guad Venegas, thank you so much. Staying at the border, Texas state officials now advising U.S. citizens not to travel to Mexico at all as safety concerns grow after the recent kidnapping of 4 Americans in a dangerous Mexican border city. The warning comes as many travelers gear up for spring break just around the corner. NBC's Sam Brock with more on those trouble spots.
Right as a crush of spring breakers hit the beaches from Cabo to Cancun, an urgent warning from Texas state officials not to travel to Mexico due to the ongoing violence throughout the country.
That's why we urge anyone, because of the volatile situation, to avoid traveling into Mexico, especially now at this time.
Mexico, here we come.
The abduction of 4 Americans from South Carolina visiting one of the most dangerous border towns and murder of 2 of them has cast a harsh spotlight on going south of the border. There's also the recent disappearance of 3 women from the McAllen area who went to sell items at a flea market and haven't been seen in weeks. The State Department's highest Level 4 designation, Do Not Travel, was issued in October for just 6 states in Mexico. But popular tourist destinations like Cabo and Cancun are at Level 2, exercise increased caution. That's the same category as most of Western Europe, including England and France.
If you were a family planning a trip right now to one of these coastal destinations, would you still go?
I think it depends on what the destination is. What's the security situation like? What are past incidents like there?
On the shores of South Beach, Florida, mixed reactions.
There's many other parts of the world where it's warm and nice. You don't necessarily have to go to Mexico.
So safety would be potentially a concern for you?
Safety would be the main thing, because when I think about traveling, you're looking for comfort and experiences. You're not looking for trouble.
The reality is, any country, including Mexico, you go to the wrong places, there's potential for things like this to happen.
With spring break just now hitting its peak, fresh warnings and a wave of questions.
And Sam Brock joins us now from Miami. Sam, as you mentioned, spring break just around the corner here. So what are the recommendations for those who are still choosing to travel to Mexico?
Morgan, sometimes the simplest advice is also the best advice. Do your homework. Reach out to the resort where you plan on staying and find out what's their security plan like, what's the criminal environment like, and history there. Do people feel safe? What are their backup plans? So at least you understand what you're getting into. Also, experts say that you should absolutely connect with the U.S. Embassy ahead of time and register with them, whether it's a natural hazard or it's some sort of criminal threat. You'll be glad that you did. Morgan?
Back now with Top Stories newsfeed, and we begin with a 13-hour standoff between Missouri police and a man accused of shooting one of their officers. Dramatic video showing the moment a SWAT team arrested the suspect after they drove him out of his home with tear gas. Police say late Sunday night that man shot and killed Detective Sergeant Mason Griffith and wounded another inside of a convenience store. All of this happening in Herman, about an hour west of St. Louis. Charges are still pending. In California, a pilot was forced to eject from a small plane moments before it crashed. Cell phone video shows the plane nosediving into a lake just northwest of Salinas, California. In fact, you can see the plane plunging at high speed on the left, the pilot parachuting after it on the right. He was later taken to the hospital and is expected to be okay. The FAA and NTSB are both investigating the cause of that crash. A man in Ohio has been hospitalized after being attacked by a zebra Sunday afternoon. Body camera footage from the Pickaway County Sheriff's Office shows the aftermath of the attack. Deputies helping the injured man to an ambulance after he was bit in the arm by a zebra he owned. Police say the animal remained aggressive and it was later put down. And Stanford University investigating an anti-Semitic incident inside one of its own dorms. The school says multiple swastikas, as well as an image of Adolf Hitler, were found on a whiteboard attached to the door of a Jewish student's dorm room. The university condemning the incident, calling it, quote, a brazen threat. This is now the third anti-Semitic incident to occur on campus in just the last 2 weeks. Turning overseas now, the United States and North Korea began their biggest joint military drills in years as tensions rise in that region. And breaking tonight, South Korea's military says North Korea just fired a ballistic missile towards the Sea of Japan. NBC's foreign correspondent Josh Letterman with more on that.
Tonight, the U.S. and South Korea launching their biggest joint military exercises in years, readying themselves to defend against an evolving North Korean threat. North Korea wasting no time in retaliating. Official state media saying the North launched 2 cruise missiles on the eve of the drills from a submarine off North Korea's coast, claiming they flew for 2 hours in figure eights over the Sea of Japan. South Korea's military confirming they tracked at least 1 missile launch from the north, saying they're working with U.S. intelligence to analyze it. The test launch a pointed reminder of the escalating security threat from North Korea, which conducted more than 70 missile tests last year, the most ever. As the U.S. intelligence community predicts Pyongyang may soon conduct its 7th nuclear test.
Continues its efforts to steadily expand and enhance its nuclear and conventional capabilities, targeting the United States and our allies.
U.S. National Intelligence Director Avril Haines saying North Korea is using aggression to reshape the region.
And to reinforce its status as a de facto nuclear power.
The joint U.S.-South Korean military drills are the largest in 5 years, ever since former President Trump scaled them back as he pursued diplomacy with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. They'll involve some of the roughly 28,500 U.S. troops stationed in South Korea, plus others deployed from Japan and the U.S. Kim Jong-un says the exercises are proof it's South Korea and its ally, the United States, provoking tensions. His military treating the joint drills as rehearsals for an invasion of his country. Amid the specter of nuclear war, Seoul's mayor telling Reuters tonight that South Korea should consider going nuclear itself as a deterrent, a position at odds with the U.S. stance that the whole Korean peninsula should be denuclearized. Tonight, the region on high alert as the war games begin, bracing for potentially even more North Korean retaliation.
And Josh Letterman joins us from Seoul, South Korea. Josh, you reported this will be the largest joint exercise with the U.S. and South Korea in 5 years. So what more can we expect to see during these exercises?
Well, Morgan, they're set to last for 11 days with no breaks, and the U.S. and South Korea will be practicing joint amphibious landings, live artillery fire exercises, and even computerized simulations of what a North Korean attack on South Korea could look like. Morgan?
All right, Josh, thank you so much. Now to an NBC News exclusive. Nightly news anchor Lester Holt sitting down with the UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak for his first ever US TV interview, discussing everything from rising tensions with China to his personal relationship with King Charles.
Britain is back, and part of the job that I've got as Prime Minister is to give people that confidence in our country.
Rishi Sunak emerged last fall from a revolving door of British prime ministers. Now returning to a state he called home for several years, we fittingly met aboard a retired warship, now the USS Midway Museum, just as Prime Minister Sunak leads the UK into an even closer military alliance with the US and Australia, as concerns grow over China.
Is China a threat? China represents the biggest state threat to our economic interests, for sure, and is a systemic challenge for the world order. Now, that's why it's important that we take steps to protect ourselves against that.
Alarms raised recently over that Chinese spy balloon. What kind of signal did the balloon that overflew the U.S. send?
The balloon incident here was an example of that behavior that I talked about that is concerning, whether it's the balloon incident, whether it's how China's behaving in the South China Seas. Those are all examples of a regime that is acting in a way that is not aligned with the values that we share between the US, the UK, Australia, and other allies.
And then there's China's role in Russia's war in Ukraine. China already gives crucial economic aid to Russia. Would it go further and provide weapons? If that were to happen, what should the response be?
That would be a very worrying and dangerous development.
Would you support sanctions against China?
I think with sanctions, it's always something that is best done coordinated with allies, because for sanctions to be effective, we have to do them together.
You have suggested that everything is on the table when it comes to defending Ukraine. UK stepped forward with tanks, longer-range missiles. Do you draw the line at fighter jets, or is that still in the cards as far as you're concerned?
I think it's important right now that we accelerate and intensify our support to Ukraine. And the reason I say that is because they have an opportunity to have a decisive advantage on the battlefield if they're given the right support. And that's why we've led an effort to provide extra capabilities, heavy tanks, longer range fires, more air defense. And what we want to do is to ensure that Ukraine can win.
Your counterparts in Germany and France have suggested this is going to end up in a negotiation when all is said and done. Do you think that's where and how this ends?
Well, I think, look, ultimately, those decisions are for Ukraine to make. Our job is to put them in the best possible position to make those decisions. We want to see Ukraine victorious.
Prime Minister Sunak making history as Britain's first prime minister of color. And he came into office at another moment of historic change, with the UK getting its first new monarch in over 70 years. What's your relationship like with King Charles?
I mean, I was his first appointed prime minister, actually. It's a very special moment in my life, and now I have the privilege of sitting down with him every week.
Good discussions?
Great discussions.
He's trying to modernize the monarchy. You're trying to bring more tech into the UK's economy. Are you kindred spirits on some level?
I think, look, actually, King Charles is someone who issues that politicians and governments are grappling with have been issues that he's been talking about for a long time, particularly climate change, where he's been very passionate about that topic. He's someone who, absolutely is someone who wants to represent everybody. As Prime Minister, it's a great privilege to champion all our British institutions, our culture, our history, our values around the world, but particularly the monarchy.
Powerful insight, Lester Holt. Thank you so much. Coming up on Top Story tonight, the longest-running cyclone in history. It's now killed more than 100 people. We'll tell you where it's made landfall again. That's next. Back now with Top Story's Global Watch, and we begin with an update on Tropical Storm Freddie, which we've been covering here for weeks now. At least 66 people killed in Malawi after Freddie made landfall for a second time. The storm is now officially the longest-lasting, most energetic cyclone in world history. More than 100 people have been killed across multiple countries since the cyclone first formed back on February 6th. And the Colombian military seizing a submarine with an estimated $80 million worth of cocaine on board. The Navy releasing video of the ship, which they say contained not only 3,600 kilos of cocaine, but also 2 dead bodies. Authorities believe a toxic fume leak on board the drug smuggling vessel caused their deaths. 2 surviving crew members were also found on board the ship and were taken to a hospital for treatment. And in South Korea tonight, a massive fire breaking out at a tire factory. In fact, we have video just in from Daejeon, South Korea. It shows flames raging through the building and black smoke rising into that sky. At least 5 workers rushed to a hospital for smoke inhalation. Nearby neighborhoods also evacuated as strong winds caused that smoke to spread. Well, thanks so much for watching Top Story for Tom Llamas. I'm Morgan Chesky. And up next, a big first we're all very excited about. Stay tuned now with Gotti Schwartz. Gets its start right now and will be on at 8 p.m. every night after Top Story. Good luck, Gotti. We know you do a great job. Go get 'em.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.